Hello everyone, welcome to ITLS Academy. This lecture is continuation of clinical use of antimicrobial drugs. Let's see clinical use. The choice of antimicrobial chemotherapy is initially dependent upon the clinical diagnosis. Under some circumstances, the clinical diagnosis implies a microbiological diagnosis which may dictate specific therapy. For example, typhoid fever is caused by Salmonella typhi, which is generally sensitive to chloramphenicol, cotrimoxazole, and ciprofloxacin. However, for many infections, establishing a clinical diagnosis implies a range of possible microbiological causes and requires laboratory confirmation from sample collected, preferably before antibiotic therapy is begun. Laboratory isolation and susceptibility testing of the causative agent establish the diagnosis with certainty and make drug selection more rational. However, in many circumstances, especially in general practice, microbiological documentation of an infection is not possible. Hence, knowledge of usual microbiological cause of a particular infection and its susceptibility to antimicrobial agents is essential for effective drug prescribing. The following section explores a selection of the problems associated with antimicrobial drug prescribing for a range of clinical problems. Here comes respiratory tract infections. Infections of the respiratory tract are among the most commonest of infections and account for much consultation in general practice and a high percentage of acute hospital admissions. They are divided into infections of the upper respiratory tract involving the ears, throat, nasal sinuses, and the trachea, and lower respiratory tract where they affect the airways, lungs, and pleura. Upper respiratory tract infections. Acute pharyngitis presents a diagnostic and therapeutic dilemma. The majority of sore throat caused by a variety of viruses, fewer than 20% are bacterial and hence potentially responsible to antibiotic therapy. However, antibiotics are widely prescribed, and this reflects the difficulty in discriminating streptococcal from non-streptococcal infections clinically in the absence of microbiological documentation. Lower respiratory tract infections. Infections of lower respiratory tract include pneumonia, lung abscess, bronchitis, and infective complications of cystic fibrosis. Each presents a specific diagnostic and therapeutic challenge which reflects the variety of pathogens involved and frequent difficulties in stabilizing an accurate microbial diagnosis. The laboratory diagnosis of lower respiratory tract infections is largely dependent upon culturing sputum. Unfortunately, this may be contaminated with the normal bacterial flora of the upper respiratory tract during expectoration. Alternative diagnostic samples include needle aspiration or sputum directly from the trachea or of fluid within the pleural cavity. Blood may also be cultured and serum examined for antibody response on or microbial antigens. Next is our pneumonia. The range of pathogens causing acute pneumonia include viruses, bacteria, and in the immunocompromised host, parasites and fungi. Clinical assessment includes details of the evolution of infection, any evidence of a recent viral infection, the age of the patient, and the risk factors such as corticosteroid therapy or pre-existing lung disease. The extent of the pneumonia are assessed clinically or by X-ray is also important. Streptococcus pneumoniae remains the commonest cause of pneumonia and responds well to penicillin. In addition, a number of atypical infections may cause pneumonia and include Mycoplasma pneumoniae and occasionally Q fever. With psittacosis, there may be a history of contact with parrot or Buchnerius, while Legionnaire disease has often been acquired during hotel holidays in the Mediterranean area. Mycoplasma infections are best treated with either erythromycin or tetracycline, while the latter drug is indicated for both psittacosis and Q fever. Lung abscess. Destructions of lung tissue may lead to abscess formation and is the feature of aerobic gram-negative bacillary and Staphylococcus aureus infections. In addition, aspiration of oropharyngeal secretion can lead to chronic low-grade sepsis with abscess formation and the expectoration of foul-smelling sputum, which characterizes anaerobic sepsis. In the case of aerobic gram-negative bacillary sepsis, aminoglycosides with or without a broad spectrum cephalosporin are the agents of choice. Acute staphylococcal pneumonia is an extremely serious infection and requires treatment with high dose flucloxacillin alone or in combination with fusidic acid. Next is cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a multi-system congenital abnormality which often affects the lung and results in recurrent infections, initially with Staphylococcus aureus, subsequently with Haemophilus influenzae, and eventually leads on the recurrent Pseudomonas aeruginosa infections. The latter organism is associated with copious quantities of purulent sputum, which is extremely difficult to expectorate. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is a cofactor in the progressive lung damage, which is eventually fatal in these patients. Infections caused by Pseudomonas aeruginosa are difficult to treat and require repeated hospitalization and administration of parenteral antibiotics such as an aminoglycoside, either alone or in combination with anti-pseudomonal penicillin. Next is our urinary tract infection. Urinary tract infection is a common problem in both community and hospital practice. Although occurring throughout life, infections are more common in preschool girls and women during their childbearing years, although in the elderly the sex distribution is similar. Infection is predisposed by factors which impair urine flow. These include congenital abnormalities, reflux of urine from the bladder into the ureters, kidney stone and tumors, and in males, enlargement of the prostate gland. Bladder catheterization is an important cause of urinary tract infection in hospitalized patients. In those with structural or drainage problems, the risk exists of ascending infection to involve the kidney and occasionally the bloodstream. Although structural abnormalities may be absent in women of childbearing age, infections can become recurrent, symptomatic, and extremely distressing. Here comes the drug therapy. The antimicrobial treatment of urinary tract infection presents a number of interesting challenges. Drugs must be selected for their ability to achieve high urinary concentrations and, if the kidney is involved, adequate tissue concentrations. Safety in childhood or pregnancy is important since repeated or prolonged medications may be necessary. The choice of agent will be dictated by the microbial etiology and susceptibility findings, since the latter can vary widely among gram-negative enteric bacilli, especially in patients who are hospitalized. Uncomplicated community acquired Urinary tract infections presents few problems with management. Drugs such as trimethoprim, cotrimoxazole, ciprofloxacin and ampicillin are widely used. Infections of the kidney demands the use of agents which achieve adequate tissue as well as urinary concentrations. Since bacteremia, a condition in which there are bacteria circulating in the blood, may complicate infection of the kidney, it is generally recommended that antibiotics be administered penetrally. Infections of the prostate tend to be persistent, recurrent, and difficult to treat. This is in part due to more acid involvement of the prostate gland, which inhibits drug penetration by many of the antibiotics used to treat urinary tract infections. Next is our gastrointestinal infections. The gut is vulnerable to infections by viruses, bacteria, parasites, and occasionally fungi. Virus infections are the most prevalent but are not susceptible to chemotherapeutic interventions. Bacterial infections are more readily recognized and raise questions concerning the role of antibiotic management. Parasitic infections of the gut are beyond the scope of this chapter. Bacteria cause disease of the gut as a result of either mucosal invasion or toxin production or a combination of the two mechanisms. Treatment is largely directed at replacing and maintaining an adequate intake of fluid and electrolytes. It should be emphasized that most gut infections are self-limiting. However, attacks can be severe and may result in hospitalization. Antibiotics are used to treat severe Campylobacter and Shigella infections. Erythromycin and cotrimoxazole respectively are preferred agents. Such treatment abbreviates the disease and eliminates gut excretion in Shigella infections. However, in severe Campylobacter infection, the data are currently equivocal. Although the clinical impression favors the use of erythromycin for severe infections. Cholera is a serious infection causing epidemics throughout Asia. Although a toxin-mediated disease, largely controlled with replacement of fluid and electrolyte losses. Tetracycline has proved effective in eliminating the causative vibrio from the bowel, thereby abbreviating the course of illness and reducing the total fluid and electrolyte losses. Skin and soft tissue infections. Infections of the skin and soft tissues commonly follow traumatic injury to the epithelium but occasionally may be blood-borne. Interruption of the integrity of the skin allows ingress of microorganisms to produce superficial localized infections which on occasion may become more deep seated and spread rapidly through tissues. Microbes responsible for skin infections often arise from the normal skin flora, which includes Staphylococcus aureus. In addition, Streptococcus pyogenes, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and anaerobic bacteria are other recognized pathogens. Viruses also affect the skin and mucosal surfaces either as a result of generalized infection or localized disease, such as in the case of herpes simplex. Streptococcus pyogenes is responsible for a range of skin infections. Impetigo is a superficial infection of the epidermis which is common in childhood and is highly contagious. Staphylococcus aureus is responsible for a variety of skin infections which require therapeutic approaches different from those of streptococcal infections. Staphylococcal cellulitis is indistinguishable clinically from streptococcal cellulitis and responds to cloxacillin and flucloxacillin but generally fails to respond to penicillin owing to penicillinase or beta-lactamase production. Central nervous system infections. The brain is surrounding covering of meninges and the spinal cord are subject to infection, which is generally blood-borne but may also complicate neurosurgery, penetrating injuries, or direct spread from infection in the middle ear or nasal sinuses. Viral meningitis is the most common infection but is generally self-limiting. Occasionally, destructive forms of encephalitis occurs. An example is herpes simplex encephalitis. Bacterial infections include meningitis and brain abscess and carry a high risk of mortality. The treatment of bacterial infections of the central nervous system highlights a number of important therapeutic considerations. Bacterial meningitis is caused by a variety of bacteria, although their incidence varies with age. Penicillin is the drug of choice for the treatment of group B streptococcal, meningococcal, and pneumococcal infections. But as discussed earlier, cerebrospinal fluid concentration of penicillin are significantly influenced by the intensity of the inflammatory response. To achieve therapeutic concentrations within the cerebrospinal fluid, high doses are required, and in the case of pneumococcal meningitis should be continued for 10 to 14 days. Resistance of Haemophilus influenzae to ampicillin has increased in the past decade and varies geographically. Thus, it can no longer be prescribed with confidence as initial therapy. Brain abscess presents a different therapeutic challenges, and abscess is locally destructive to the brain and causes further damage by increasing intracranial pressure. The infecting organisms are varied, but those arising from middle ear or nasal sinus infections are often polymicrobial and include anaerobic bacteria, microaerophilic species, and gram-negative enteric bacilli. Here are some antibiotic policies. Let's discuss rationale. The plethora of available antimicrobial agents presents both an increasing problem of selection to the prescriber and difficulties to the diagnostic laboratory as to which agents should be tested for susceptibility. Differences in antimicrobial activity among related compounds are often of minor importance but can occasionally be of greater significance and may be a source of confusion to the non specialist. In recent years, increased awareness of the cost of medical care has led to a major review of various aspects of the health cost. The pharmacy budget has often attracted attention since, unlike many other hospital expenses, it is readily identifiable in terms of cost and prescribers. Thus, we can say that an antibiotic policy is also seen as a means whereby the economic burden of drug prescribing can be reduced or contained. Another argument in favor of an antibiotic policy is the occurrence of drug resistant bacteria within an institution. The presence of sick patients and the opportunities for the spread of microorganisms can produce outbreaks of hospital infection. The excessive use of selected agents has been associated with the emergence of drug resistant bacteria, which have often caused serious problems within high dependency areas such as intensive care units or burns units, where antibiotic use is often high. In formulating an antibiotic policy, it is important that the susceptibility of microorganisms be monitored and reviewed at regular intervals. This applies not only to the hospitals as a whole but to specific high dependency units in a particular. Here are the types of antibiotic policies. There are a number of different approaches to the organization of an antibiotic policy. These range from a deliberate absence of any restriction or on prescribing to a strict policy whereby all anti-infective agents must have expert approval before they are administered. Restrictive policies vary according to whether they are mainly laboratory controlled by employing restrictive reporting or whether they are mainly pharmacy controlled by restrictive dispensing. In many institutions, it is common practice to combine the two approaches. Free prescribing policy. The advocates of a free prescribing policy argue that strict antibiotic policies are both impractical and limit clinical freedom to prescribe. Here, it is also argued that the greater the number of agents in the use, the less likely it is that drug resistance will emerge to any one agent or class of agents. Restricted reporting. Another approach that is widely practiced in the UK is that of restricted reporting. The laboratory, largely for practical reasons, tests only a limited range of agents against bacterial isolates. The agents may be selected primarily by microbiological staff or following consultation with their clinical colleagues. The antibiotics tested will vary according to the site of infection, since drugs used to treat urinary tract infections often differ from those used to treat systemic disease. Restricted dispensing. As mentioned above, the most the most draconian of all antibiotic policies is the absolute restriction of drug dispensing pending expert approval. The expert opinion may be provided by either a microbiologist or infectious disease specialist. Such a system can only be effective in large institutions where staff are available 24 hours a day. This approach is often cumbersome, generates hostility, and does not necessarily create the best educational forum for learning effective antibiotic prescribing. A more widely used approach is to divide agents into those approved for unrestricted use and those for restricted use. Agents on the unrestricted list are appropriate for the majority of common clinical situations. The restricted list may include agents where microbiological sensitivity information is essential, such as for vancomycin and certain aminoglycosides. Such a policy should have a mechanism whereby desirable new agents are added as they become available and is most appropriately decided at the therapeutic committee. Policing such a policy is best effected as a joint arrangement between senior pharmacist and microbiologist. This combined approach of both restricted reporting and restricted prescribing is extremely effective and provides a powerful educational tool for medical staff and students faced with learning the complexities of modern antibiotic prescribings. So guys, our session on this particular lecture is ends here. Thank you very much for watching this session. We will continue our next lecture in our upcoming series. Thank you very much for watching this session.